Alright, so this is going to be actually a somewhat different video. One commenter asked me for a review on Tapp, and I figured why not review a bunch of other introductory differential geometry books as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. Just a caveat though, I have not read all of these books front to back. I have read a good portion of many of these books. Sometimes I've just skimmed parts, but I have a good idea of what is in what content is in each of the books. So to begin, we're going to be looking at Tapp's treatment of differential geometry, which is right here. And Tapp does differential geometry very similarly to Carmo, which I'm going to be reviewing later. He opens up with curves, and he actually has a chapter dedicated to additional topics which are more advanced and probably might not be covered in a university course. Surfaces, curvature, and then he dedicates 2 chapters to geodesics and the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. There's also an appendix on topology, if one needs that. So I would say the prerequisites for this, Tapp literally states prerequisites right here: multivariable calculus, linear algebra, and real analysis. But in my personal opinion, I do not think you need real analysis to study this book. I think you can get a large amount of the content without knowing concepts in real analysis. You still need to know how to prove things. That's fundamental, but all the topics in real analysis, I'm not so sure. Plus, there's the appendix there, so if you really need it. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I would say this book is not as difficult as Carmo, which I'm going to be covering right after. And I would say if you're a self-studier, this book is ideal. So that's that. Let's move on to Carmo's book of the same title, Differential Geometry of Curves and Surfaces. This one was written much earlier. This was the book that my math teacher used back when she was an undergrad. And this was the very first differential geometry book I read back in my junior year of high school. You will notice from the contents that it's very similarly organized to Tapp. Curves, surfaces. The 3rd chapter is called The Geometry of the Gauss Map. That's equivalent to Tapp's curvature chapter. And then Tapp's geodesic and Gauss-Bonnet theorem chapters are equivalent to this. Notice that there's an extra chapter on global differential geometry. Some of the topics in this chapter are also in Tapp. He just spreads them out throughout the book. So those are 2 very differing approaches. But overall, I find Carmo to be a slightly more difficult book than Tapp. I think the exercises are overall more challenging, and I feel like Carmo often skips a lot of steps. Sometimes his notation is a little bit confusing, and I often found myself, needing to I was like running to my math teacher every day, just asking a bunch of questions about this book. Like, it was a little confusing for me, I'm not gonna lie, but let's see. Yeah. Despite that, it is not the most difficult book that I'm going to be reviewing today. However, I would say that this is probably this is probably the book that I would use if I were teaching a very first introductory course on differential geometry. And, of course, the prereqs I would say are the same as Tapp. Though, there is something that I forgot to mention, and that is the treatment of the inverse function theorem. Carmo assumes you know about the inverse function theorem. So, if you don't know it, you might want to learn about that one topic. Like, you don't even need to know all of multivariable analysis. You should just learn that one topic. I believe Tapp has a section dedicated to like a little bit of multivariable analysis. He doesn't really like prove much of the stuff in there, but the inverse function theorem is mentioned in there. So if you don't know the inverse function theorem, you're safer going with this book instead of Carmo. But my point is Carmo is more challenging. So now let's move on to Needham, which is the first book that differs considerably in content. Visual differential geometry and forms. I think that this is the friendliest differential geometry book that I have. And it might be the friendliest differential geometry book, period. I don't know. But this is, I would say you don't need to know much higher math for this. Of course, they're like double integrals in the Gauss-Bonnet theorem and vector calculus for the differential form section. But I feel like you could scrape by with just calc knowledge, single variable calculus knowledge. I think. So there's the first act, he calls it, the nature of space, sort of an introduction. Then he focuses on the metric, which the previous two books would label the first fundamental form. But this is actually interesting. Act 3 is curvature. Act 4 is parallel transport. And I believe there are multiple proofs of the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. Yeah, 4. Using differing concepts, which is pretty interesting. There are also, of course, applications to general relativity. And then the 5th act is on differential forms, just very basic introduction to differential forms. And that's it. This book, I feel, as you might notice, is actually a pretty broad overview. But it's nothing that crazy. It's not like anything that's like too difficult to grasp. I think this could be like a really cool like senior year high school elective for kids who have already done calculus or something like that. I would also say this is pretty useful if you want to learn a bit of general relativity, because you saw the applications. And the thing about the prior two books is that they use the setting of R3, right? So there are curves and surfaces, but they're in R3. I don't think this is necessarily the case for this one. Does this book define a manifold? That's what I want to know. I believe it does. 280. Okay, so that's interesting. This is definitely the least difficult of the books that I have, and I would recommend this for laymen who are not necessarily interested in pursuing higher mathematics, but are still interested in the concepts nevertheless. Now we come to this book, Morita's Geometry of Differential Forms. Unlike the first three books, this one focuses entirely on differential forms. And for that reason, you're going to want a solid understanding of linear algebra, but there's also I think Durham cohomology is introduced pretty early on, chapter 3. I would say you need some topology for this as well. Like, you're going to want to know topological spaces in order to define a manifold. I don't think, like you never really needed that topological knowledge for Tapp or Carmo, because you can get by with like curves and surfaces, but for this book is a little more serious. And as you might expect, it's pretty difficult. I think this is the most difficult undergraduate text I have. In fact, it's even debatable, to be honest, if this is even undergraduate or not. I would recommend just reading the first 4 chapters, because after chapter 4, it just talks about characteristic classes, and I feel like that sort of thing is more graduate level. It's definitely a step up in terms of difficulty. But yeah, I would recommend this for honors undergraduate students or advanced undergraduate students, maybe juniors or seniors who have taken already like an introductory differential geometry class and are looking for something a little bit more. The final 2 books I have are sort of weird. This one is called Grinfeld's Introduction to Tensor Analysis and the Calculus of Moving Surfaces, which is quite a mouthful. Now, to be honest, I don't have a clue what the calculus of moving surfaces is. Like, I mean, I can guess from the name, but like besides that, so as you might expect from the title, this book covers some pretty niche content. And what I mean by that is there's an entire part dedicated to this thing, which I have never heard of before until I got this book. It also focuses a lot on tensors, just like the next book that I'm going to be reviewing. And what's interesting about this book is that it covers it from a very geometric point of view, and it's very, it's got a very unique sort of a perspective on these topics, which might be familiar from other books such as the covariant derivative or the determinant, Levi-Civita symbol, curvature. I got this book and I assumed it would serve as a valuable resource for the tensor book that I'm trying to write, but as it turns out, the perspective of this book seems to be, one might say, orthogonal to that of mine. So, yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this book. I'd say you should know your linear algebra. I mean, like, it's tensors, so you should know linear algebra, and of course, multivariable as well. But I would say if you're a student already taking an introductory differential geometry course and you're looking for a supplement for an alternative perspective to differential geometry, perhaps one using more of the, as one might say, a debauch of indices, this is the book. The last book is it Sochi? Introduction to Differential Geometry of Space Curves and Surfaces. And this one covers very similar content to Tapp and Carmo, but it's from the perspective of tensor calculus. I don't think Tapp or Carmo mentioned tensors once in their books, to be honest. Actually, Carmo mentions tensors in the Riemannian geometry book, but that's a different book. But as you can see, there are preliminaries, curves, surfaces, so curvature, so you can see how it's very similar to Tapp and Carmo in that regard. And then you can see the remarkable theorem, Gauss-Bonnet theorem, so that's chapter 4 of Carmo. But interestingly enough, the last chapters are dedicated to various kinds of curves and surfaces. Whereas these sorts of topics would be just scattered throughout Carmo or Tapp. I guess Sochi saves them for the end. And this is deliberately meant to cover differential geometry from the tensor calculus perspective, as I mentioned beforehand. So you're going to be seeing lots of indices. You can just see right here. So this is an interesting way to cover introductory differential geometry, I must admit. To be honest, I don't know how I feel about the more calculation-based approach that Soki uses versus the more abstract approach that Carmo and Tapp use. I'd have to do a little bit more thinking about that, a little bit more reflection. But anyways, that's it. Those are the 6 books I have on introductory differential geometry. Let me know if these reviews were helpful. I might make some more, either on other topics or advanced differential geometry. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.